Never have enough time to play it all. You know everybody wants to walk in someone else's shoes. Everyone's forgot who they are. Such a grind.
Welcome back to Otter Creek in Rio Grande. I'm going to get started on the spline, the roadbed from Maroon Creek up to the staging yard and the time saver. Now, I've had a lot of interest, in the comments on the videos, Facebook, and even a few emails about the spline. So I'm going to try and do this section maybe a little more step by step, kind of show you what my process is and that kind of thing. Just because this probably will be the last stretch of the railroad where I make use of spline, and then it will more than likely be behind me, both the lower and the upper spline. So the concept, of course, if you're new to the channel, is this is what I'm kind of wanting to represent. Of course, there's no way that I will get it exactly like that, but I'm going to try and do something that, represents that. And so the spline right through here where it bulges out from the bench work there, that of course will be this area right in here. And then hopefully I can do it in such a way that the mountain comes down from somewhere, the lower quarter, lower 1/3 of the backdrop through here, and then it'll just be a decision on whether or not I bring it all the way to the floor like John Allen would have, or if I stop it, somewhere more reasonable. So that's yet to be determined, but that's, kind of what I'm trying to do. And then the upper line will go through the mountain, that exists up here. And then, I'm trying to create multiple seam blocks in there so that in any one given place is kind of a snapshot that you can see just standing there with seam blocks as appropriate. The material, in case you don't already know, is 1/4 inch masonite hardboard. You can usually get it at your local hardware store, and in short chunks like this, it's not very bendy, but if you get an 8-foot string of it, it bends just enough that you can create natural radii, just by itself. It will create its own easement, and it's just a really natural way of working with track. So that's what I'm using. This is 1.5 inches this way, and I found that worked pretty good. I think if you probably could go less than 1.5 inches, but you run a risk of this wanting to bend this way, which it will a little bit over a distance, but for the most part, it will stay nice and true and straight like this, which is kind of what you want. So that's what I'm using, and it starts with just one stretch with some risers here and there to kind of get an idea of how things are going to look, how you want them to work. So then you just start, if you get everything laid out like you want, you just glue them, about 6 or 8 inches overlapping on each other, which I'll get to that eventually. So where I'm at the moment is I've taken a measurement down at this end, and down at that end, I'm 54 3/4 inches, and then at Maroon Creek, the opposite end, I'm 51 inches. So that's going to be my rise. And now I just need to figure out what my total run is going to be so I can figure out what my risers are going to be, because none of these risers are actually where they're going to be. And at this point, I don't even know what my grade will going to be. I'm just relatively sure it's going to be less than 2%. Now to help figure all this out, what I've done is I've gone ahead and marked every location where I'm going to start with a riser. So I've got 7 different risers, not counting this one over here, you know, where I'm connected to Maroon Creek. That's ground 0. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the last one back here is the landing point. That's the total height I want. I'll take you down there and show you that. This 53.25 is the final height from the floor to the bottom of the spline there, which should be the exact same measurement as here where it actually connects to the plywood. So, you know, because what I don't want is to have too much of a grade right at where the joints meet. So I want to extend that, you know, at least 8 or 10 inches. And I think I've got plenty of room to do it right here. That's going to give me a total of 3.75 inches of rise. So now the next step is to figure out what the run is. And since everything is curvy and a little difficult to measure, what I've done is at each one of these splices here, I've created a mark so that I can pull it all off of the bench work there and then lay it on the ground, reconnect it, and then measure both the total run, and then I can also measure from riser to riser. And then, you know, I should be able to get pretty accurate with what my heights need to be on the riser so I can figure out what the total grade will be. As it turns out, it's exactly a 21-foot run. So now I know exactly what the run is, and now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to measure the distance from each riser to the next. So from point 0 to the first riser will be X number of inches, yada, yada, yada. That way I can, my plan is to figure all the risers with millimeters above the bench work, but I kind of have to do some other things first before I can get to where I'm ready to do that. So again, I'm bringing you along, kind of showing you what my process is, however convoluted it may be. Now this may be a little more than some of you bargained for, but since I'm sharing my progress, I'm going to be thorough here. So this is railroadboy.com, which is a grade calculator. I think I've shared this before. It's a very good tool. So we're going to go in here, and we know that we want a rise of 3.75 inches. That's our rise, and we know our run is 21 feet, which is 252 inches. Your units need to be the same. So that's giving us an effective grade of 1.49, you know, about a 1.5 grade. No radius configured in because I don't think that's going to matter, and I'm far enough under a 2% grade that it shouldn't matter. So 1.49 is our goal in between each riser. So now the next thing I'm going to do is, because I've gone in and I have measured the distance from each of my risers from 0 to 1 is 46 7/8. So now we're lucky enough that you can see that 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, they give you a decimal conversion on this, and 7/8 is 0.875 right there. So I need to figure out what my rise is with a run of 46 0.87. Okay, I'm looking for the 1.49. That's what I'm trying to get. So we're kind of working backwards. We'll just see if we go up 0.75, we go up 3/4 of an inch, that gives us more than our 1.49. If we go up a 1/2 inch, that only gives us 1% grade. So let me think about this. You can find charts online. I just went ahead and wrote down a bunch of the conversions here. So I need something more than a 1/2 inch, less than 3/4 of an inch. Let's see 0.68, what that gives us. That gives us 1.45. So that's probably as close as we're gonna get unless we want to go to 30 of an inch, and I don't care to go to 30 seconds. So 0.68 is 11/16. So I need to add 11/16 to the total height of my original height at 49.5 inches. So I'm going to add 0.68 to 0.5 and get my height. So 49.5 and 0.68 added together should give us 50.18, which should be the same as 50 and 3/16 of an inch. So that's what I'm looking at for riser 1. I've marked on here where 50 and 3/16 is, which is a little less than 3/4 of an inch. So that should work. And my first riser is now exactly where it needs to be if all of my mathing is correct. Now that the first riser is in and I've got it accurate to what I want from the floor up and the distance from the 0 point, I've gone in and measured in centimeters the distance from here to the top, and that was 19.8 centimeters. Now the distance from this riser to the next riser was 29.12 inches. Converted to centimeters is 73.95. So then if I'm looking for my 1.5% grade going up, I end up needing a 1.1 centimeter rise from here. So now I measure from the top down from here to there, which gets me 20.9 centimeters. So when I go to put this one in, you can see how I do that. And then I'll do that the same for every other riser. That's why I took the time to measure between risers, because I like working with centimeters more so than fractions, just because. So I'm going to get started on doing the rest of this, getting all of the risers installed, and then come back and start gluing spline. Risers 1 through 5 are all set in a permanent type of way, and for the most part I'm happy with the radius of the spline there. Now, coming up with the grade is probably the most tedious part of this whole thing. The next thing that's a little bit of something is figuring out the distance of the spline and connecting it to 1/2 inch plywood, because you have such a discrepancy in the size of your material. So I'm going to show you how I do that. Now, I've done this a couple of different ways, but one of the advantages of having lots of bench work is you have plenty of scrap material left over. So what I've done is I've taken the last about 32 inches of the spline that's actually coming into here, cut it out, and then created these blocks, which are the exact same size of the spline coming in. Now that's going to be put underneath here. See if I can do this on camera. Not being real particular at the moment. But that's the idea. Now you can see I'm going to be short because I didn't account for the 1/2 inch. But I've got the same plywood that I'm making use of up here that you laminate on top of that. Then as your spline comes in, you should be just near perfect meeting with the materials there. Now this piece of spline is not the same spline that I cut there. And you know, when you cut this stuff, you're gonna end up with a little bit of variance in height, but it's gonna be close enough. And then of course, you know, you also have the ability to manipulate it a little bit with the riser that's gonna come from here, because this happens to be just, it's kind of hard to see, it happens to be directly underneath this cross joist here. So I can support it there and it should all work out pretty good. And that's the last little thing I want to do is get this installed permanently, because I've left the last 2 risers, one back here and then one over here. I've left them loose. That way I can kind of manipulate them if my math is off just a little bit. I'll just string the spline from here to where I'm joining it over here, and then come up underneath and do whatever needs to be done with the spline to make sure it's all well supported. This part's fairly self-explanatory. Not a lot to it. You know, I suppose maybe there is a little bit of spline strategy, but it's nothing to get too wrapped around the axle about. Main thing is I didn't want any joint in any area where you're going to have a pretty good radius. If you can keep from having a splice joint there, that's the goal. So after I got everything glued, you know, the first single spline run, there was a place up here in the corner, and then this spot here where Hellgate Pass will be. You know, there was a chunk of area there that just needed to be filled in with a short piece instead of a full piece of spline. So now when these dry, this side facing me is flush all the way. So I can put a full joint of spline in there anywhere I want to kind of suit my needs. And I will start right here with a full joint, 4 feet going this way and 4 feet going the other way. And then, you know, you have to cut shorter pieces to make that work, but it's better than ending up with all of your splices in the same spot. I didn't mention it earlier, but all of my risers are cut at, as close as I could figure, the same degree of slope that the rise is, and that's just to kind of make things go a little bit smoother so you have a nice solid support structure underneath the spline. Now, if you do that, keep in mind that percentage of grade and the angle of the cut are not the same thing. So, you know, a 2% grade is not a 2% degree on your saw when you cut. Just keep that in mind. And the other thing, you know, when you're gluing, I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but you want to make sure that the top side is as close to perfect as you can get it. You can be off as much as you want on the bottom, but you want that top side to be as level across all 5 pieces, or however many you're going to use, that you can. I'm ready to lay track. I'm gonna do that in the next video. This one's long enough. Now I do wanna close with a few thoughts about glue just because. So what I like to do is I buy this premium wood glue Type Bond 2. I buy it a gallon at a time, and then I've got, multiple empty bottles from, work previously done over the years. And I like to keep one of those bottles, a smaller one, or this one, I like to keep it about 25% watered down, glue to water 25%. And so when I actually go to glue the spline, what that does is it allows me to easily spread it with a small brush, like a 1-inch filbert or whatever. And you just want a little skim of the glue on the rough side, and then you glue your first 2 splines. I try to glue rough side to rough side, where you're making your initial splice, and then rough side to smooth side everywhere else. You want enough glue that you fill in the grooves of the spline, but you don't want a bunch more, because when you squeeze them together with your clamps, the glue will end up pouring onto the floor. Absolutely have a drop cloth, but if you do it right and you do enough of it, you'll figure out pretty quick exactly how much glue you want to put on there. Having the glue just a little bit watered down makes the process go a lot quicker, because you can easily spread the glue, where the full strength Type Bond doesn't want to spread very easily. So that's kind of my final thoughts on this whole process, is getting a good glue consistency where you're not overusing and dropping, a quart of glue onto your drop cloth for no reason at all. But you'll figure that out if you do this. And then, of course, I use the full strength for the cork, just because. So we're gonna call it quits here. Hope you enjoyed this. Hopefully it wasn't too boring for some of you who've done it before. But thanks for watching Otter Creek and Rio Grande. We'll see you next time.